Hey guys, it's Feather here, and today I'm going to go over the basics of making hair with fabric. Lately we've extensively covered making hair like this, but it is a very time-consuming method, generally taking me about 3 days to prep it, sew it and style the hair. Fabric hair is much faster and easier once you know how. This is my lovely assistant Fred. Fred is going to help us out with a lot more tutorials, I hope. Normally with human plush, I make the back of the head in the same colour as the hair, partly to help me visualise the hairline, but also so that the scalp isn't visible if someone starts poking around up in there. I usually leave the hair till later, near last or actually last, because you have to think about the pattern and the surrounding body parts or clothing or accessories like that. So we gotta think about these shoulders, the height of the doll. If you're doing like a pony or a floppy plush like this shape, you'll need to think about the way the body is bent back and the distance from the head to the floor, and adjust the way the hair lies from there. I'll go over a couple of different ways of patterning out hair. The first will be hair that follows the scalp, so let's look at the head shape. Fred's head is rounder than Io's, so it's a little bit harder than trying to do chibi hair. For this we're going to need pens and pencils, some pins, scissors for cutting paper, and for this one we're going to want the pattern pieces originally used for the head. You'll want paper, and actually also I like to use kitchen paper towels. They're a little bit more pliable than regular paper, and so they're good for draping and manipulating shapes. I've got some scrap fabric in colours that I hope won't blow out the camera or clash with Fred. I'm using Minky for this tutorial, but fleece or felt will work. So the reason we're using the paper pattern pieces for the head is to help us get that curving shape. They serve as a nice base to keep the hair nice and snug against the scalp. For a generic centre parting, this pattern is an easy way to get started. Side partings might need a bit of adjustment, but I still use them as a base shape for most hairstyles. Let's start with the front. We're going to take the head pattern and some tissue paper. We draw around the top part of the pattern. I want to go for some centre parted bangs that show off the forehead, kind of like 90s Sailor Moon style. I don't really have a specific character in mind, maybe I should have, but today I'm going to wing it just a little bit. When I cut it out, I'm going to give it a pretty wide margin. Part of how I pattern hair involves some draping, and like with cutting hair or hemming fabric, you can take length away but you can't add it back. The margin at the top is a little bit less, but I still add it because the head has been stuffed now and it's ballooned outwards. Let's start pinning it to Fred. We're going to line the top point of the hair to the top point of the head. The side of the bang should follow the side of the head and over to the ears. Pull it a little bit taut, but be careful not to rip the tissue. It does have some give, but it can tear. It's looking a bit emo right now. In itself that looks okay as a long fringe piece. The curve that was drawn follows the face nicely. I wanted the little shoujo style curl, so I'm going to draw new locks in while the tissue is still pinned. I think this is the best way to draw hair patterns, as you can see immediately how the hair is going to fall against the face. The pencil is a little bit hard to see, so I'm going to go in again with pen. Be super careful if you're doing this on a proper plush. I normally keep a disappearing marker for patterning hair because then if I bleed onto the fabric, it's going to go away. I would also normally unpin the tissue to cut the new lines, but I'm kind of attempting to be quick for the camera. Unpinning, cutting and repinning is going to take time and I have to conserve memory. It's starting to take a nice shape, but the bangs are still covering Fred's eyes a little, so let's take them up again. I do this a lot with hair patterning. Normally I'll have a reference next to me and I'll just draw and redraw the hair until I think it looks good. Next, let's make a back piece. Like last time, we're going to use the corresponding pattern piece as a base. The back piece has a large dart in it, and some hairstyles will also need darts to get those nice curves in, others won't need them at all. It really depends on what you're making. I'm just wanting to go for a cute short hairstyle today, something a bit androgynous but sweet. When sewing hair in, I normally do the back first and then put the fringe in on top. So I'm going to pin this back piece in underneath the front. For me, the ears are like a focal point for where the hair should lie. Once past the ears, I normally let the hair go free and not sewn down unless the pattern calls for it. So I always make sure to pin around the ears. This hairstyle is going to need a dart. There's a lot of excess tissue along that middle. I'll pinch the excess up and fold it into a dart shape. Then I draw in those locks, using the folds as a guide. And I mark where I want the dart to end so I don't end up with misshapen hair later. Because I'm kind of winging it here by making up a design in my head, I can just add locks that work with the dart. If we were going to do a more specific character, it will require more thought. For some styles you may need to sit down and sketch on paper for a bit and try a few different styles out and positionings before settling on the final pattern. You can see now that the hair pattern is lying nice and smooth over the head and starting to look really good. I think we can start working on the fabric hair, but first, what about hair that doesn't lay flat on the head? What about spiky hair? For characters like this Rick plush or pony plush that have locks that come away from the head, I have a pretty simple trick for figuring out the base of the pattern piece. We're going to take Fred and put a piece of paper underneath him. Next, we'll get a pencil and draw around his head from ear to ear. Mark the centre and any other points of interest. This trick goes for any angle, so side to side, back to front, diagonally, anywhere. I'm thinking spikes and my mind immediately goes to Goku, so if you were using my pattern to make Goku or even Vegeta, this is definitely how I'd recommend making the spiky hair. It's exactly how I made Rick's. I drew around his head, folded the paper in half, drew each spike out, and then cut the paper pattern. Because I'll be sewing hair shapes to turn inside out, I'm making these spikes end quite soft and chunky. Turning sharp ends can be kind of difficult and not look as good, which can be a downside to this kind of hair. Double-sided fabric that don't need seams like felt has an advantage here. We've cut the paper out and would you look at that, it's a perfect fit against the head. This isn't the most infallible trick, sometimes you might need to just edit the curve a little bit, but for the most part it will start you off pretty damn close. When it comes to making hair, and you're using a fabric with a pile like minky or fur, choosing the direction can be a bit tricky. My general rule of thumb is to run the pile in the direction that the hair would go. That goes for spikes too. I picked the blue piece because it had enough for the spikes, so now instead of Goku, I'm thinking about Sonic. And because I'm not making this for anything final, and it's a prototype, I'm just going to draw it out in pen really quickly. Make sure the pieces are flipped and the pile will run the same way for both. For the first pieces we made, I'm going to make a full head of hair, so I'll use purple because it's a bigger piece. You might have noticed that my hand is bandaged up. I'm still getting over a bad bite, and it's been making some parts of pinning and sewing uncomfortable lately. So I hope you'll forgive me for skipping the sewing together portion of this video. A useful video in my library is the Sewing Sharp Turns video from last year, so if you have that one, I recommend giving it a watch. Okay, so from here as well, my first camera gave out and I couldn't fix it, it just stopped working and don't know what happened. So it's second angle only from now on. Boo! Okay, so we're back and let's look at the spikes first. I'm going to go ahead and stuff them to help them stand up and give them a little bit of body. I don't stuff them too firmly because they'll start ballooning out, so I try and keep them relatively flat. Because it's a curved base, I'm going to snip the edges a little bit too. The Sonic vibes are too real. I pin them to the head, and just like the paper version, they're really snug against the head. You can combine this with the method for making the bangs earlier and make a really good look. Maybe I should have done the spikes front to back for a mohawk look. That would have looked really cool. Let's look at the other hair pieces we made. Because I didn't show you these sewing of, I'll just quickly show you that for the bangs I left the top open. I can ladder stitch them closed pretty easily. And for the back I left a small opening in the side seam that also won't be noticeable at all once sewn shut. The fringe pins in nice and smooth. It's a very neat little centre part hairstyle. I pin in at the top of the head, round the ears and down that centre part. All pinned in and it looks good, but it could look better. We can add some volume to the hair with stuffing. I normally like to use batting as it's flat and consistent, whereas stuffing can balloon out or it can clump or sag in certain spots. If you opt to stuff the hair, do so very lightly with tiny little bits at a time, and try to keep it light and flat, unless you've got a pattern for hair with really big balloony pieces. I'll sometimes press pieces like this on a low heat just to keep them flat if I'm not using batting. To add batting, I draw the outline out onto the batting. Don't use a Sharpie like I did, you'll get ink on your fabric. I literally picked this up out of the pen pot because it was in my sight. Normally I would use my vanishing markers. The batting is still a little bit too big, so I'm going to trim it down. I'm holding the scissors at a steep angle, it's almost parallel to the batting itself. I found if you do this on both sides you get a rounded or beveled edge that looks more natural once it's inside. Put the batting inside and we have a nice piece of hair. It's poofy and sturdy so it can be shaped a little bit, and it's consistent in how thick it is. One more quick tip, if you do get Sharpie on fabric, a spot of rubbing alcohol will get it right out. Pinning the fringe on again, and I think this looks better. It's nice and poofy, some extra volume makes it look more like hair, and the ends have no wrinkles. With it all pinned in, I really like how it's starting to look, but again, it could look better. Especially with just one colour in the hair, it still looks a bit flat and dull, so let's add in some last details. Take a soluble fabric marker, yep, I found it, and let's draw on some line details. It's kind of wobbly and hard on Minky, but persevere. Again, because this is an on-the-spot hairstyle, I'm just adding lines in places where I think it will look good. For particular characters you might want to follow a reference, but mostly you want to follow the natural flow of the hair while drawing down. On the back, I incorporate that dart seam into the hair details. Even just the marker pen details are making it look a little bit more dimensional. I think Fred should look a little bit happier with his new do, don't you? I've not just drawn these on for fun. Now I'm going to top stitch them down, so let's get the sewing machine out. I unpin the first piece and just quickly go over the pen lines again to make them stand out. And let's get stitching. I've set my machine on a long stitch, normally between 3 or 4 for top stitching through stuffed items. I just go very slowly and ease the piece through the feed. Check that out, that's looking so cool! The stitches add some dimension, makes the locks look poofy and a bit more separate from each other. You don't have to top stitch either though, decorative stitches can be added like satin stitches. You can do that before you sew them together and still look super cool. Let's just repeat this for the other pieces. Once done, I think they look pretty nice. Let's get them back on Fred and sew them in. I normally use a ladder stitch and follow the hairline around. I stop before reaching the bottom of these locks for a more natural look. I also generally stop around the ears too. Then I'll go around the hairline between the front and the back, and round the base of the back of the head. Because this isn't permanent and I want it to show up on the camera, let's pick a nice bright thread. I start with the back of the head, and I'll go around each piece twice to keep it secure. I use a ladder stitch to catch the underside of the hair and attach it to the head. This way it's all nice and invisible, and we get to keep the volume we have in the locks. As I said before, I'm still experiencing some discomfort, so I'll film a bit of the stitching and then get back to you guys when it's done. And we're done! That looks so cool. I really did enjoy making this hair. I love making hair anyway, so this was a fun video to do. I'd love to do more on the subject, maybe move on to specific styles or characters, so let me know what else you'd like to see, and I'd love to see what you do with this tutorial. Thanks for watching and goodbye!